to move now to the region, if you were, especially some of how this is affecting Jordan. And we are very, very honored to be joined by Tamara Nassar here, who is the associate editor of the essential Electronic Intifada. Tamara, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a privilege to have you. And I guess the first question I'll just ask you is, I think to the extent people know it, Jordan has had relations with Israel for some time now, is I think thought to be, relatively close in there. But of course, there have been a lot of tensions bubbling up from the population who's very, very angry about what's happening to the Palestinians. Some people saying Jordan could potentially change its relationship to Israel in some of the elements of normalization. How likely do you think that could be, which would be certainly a big sea change in geopolitics?
I don't think it's very likely in the grand scheme of things, but just in the past few hours before this show, there were some rare positive news. The Jordanian Foreign Minister Ayman al-Safadi announced that Jordan won't be signing a deal to provide energy to Israel in exchange for water. This was planned to be ratified, I think, this month or next month. But Jordan and Israel and the United Arab Emirates signed a memorandum for this deal 2 years ago, I believe. And this deal proposed that Israel will give Jordan excess water in exchange for Jordan supplying Israel with solar-generated energy. The protests in Jordan have been relentless. People have been on the streets since day one. Jordan's close political, economic, and military ties with Washington, the main enabler of Israel's genocide in Gaza, has definitely not rubbed off on the population. The Jordanian population staunchly and overwhelmingly supports the Palestinians. You hear chants of these protests that support the Palestinian war of liberation. There is staunch and unrelenting support for the Palestinian armed resistance, a sentiment that's, of course, not shared or expressed by Jordanian decision makers. This move to cancel this deal between Israel and Jordan, which, of course, the United Arab Emirates is also a party, and from day one only appeared to be more of a political effort to have Jordan firmly join the Abraham Accords, the series of normalization agreements that were signed between Jordan and Israel, rather than really providing touted clean water and water benefits to either side. This was always supposed to be a political win for Israel, and Israel would have been the only winner out of this deal. So I think the cancellation of this deal is extremely welcome. People were not really expecting for a material change to actually happen. Of course, we saw the publicity stunt for both the Zionist enemy and Jordan when the Jordanian aid drop in Gaza was coordinated and happened in the Jordanian field hospital on the Gaza Strip earlier this month. But I do want to credit these protests, these relentless protests, which have been a thorn in Jordan's side. They've been happening almost daily. On Fridays, they're absolutely out of control. They're massive protests. Thousands of people show up, and the Jordanian police consistently try to suppress them. They are trying to make them, people usually gather spontaneously. Of course, some of these protests are organized by recognized political parties, but now there's this move to try to make every protest coordinated by the police. But despite the considerable impression of these protests, despite the tear gas, despite the rampant arrests of protesters, people have been relentless and demanding nothing short of the cancellation of the Wadi Araba agreement, the agreement that was signed between Israel and Jordan in 1994 that officially normalized relations between the two countries.
It is really inspiring to see, and we can get a bit more into the sort of feeling in Jordan, but I wanted to address, you have heard a lot of rhetoric from the Jordanian government, from various officials, including the king, including Queen Rania, making statements we're not usually used to seeing from them that are quite harsh. Lots of condemnations. I believe there was more condemnations today as the Israelis seem to have hit a Jordanian field hospital that was operating in Gaza. And so I raised that just to note an article that you actually worked on at the Electronic Intifada about how, well, according to reports, Jordan has been basically permitting the U.S. to station additional military forces on its soil throughout Israel's genocide in Gaza. And I'm curious, how do we square that harsh rhetoric and perhaps some of these things that are happening, such as the cancellation of this agreement, or at least pausing this agreement between electricity and water, with the fact that Jordan is hosting the U.S. military as it basically comes to the region in full force to back up Israel so that nobody can obstruct its genocide.
That's right. I mean, Jordan, of course, has strongly condemned Israel's genocide in Gaza. Diplomats have been instrumental in pushing the UN General Assembly resolution that called for a ceasefire. We've all seen the Queen Rania appearance on CNN, but generally, this is just rhetoric, as you said. Jordan seems to be permitting the United States to station military forces on its soil as part of its buildup in the region, leading up to Israel's land invasion. What happened is that there were all of these reports in Israeli media about heavy lift planes that took off from supply centers in the U.S. and Europe and landed in the Jordanian airbase. Al-Muwaffaq Salti Air Base. This came also at a time when the Wall Street Journal had reported that Jordan was one of 6 countries where the Patriot missile was being sent as part of Biden's buildup in the region. Also, the U.S. Air Force announced that there were going to be U.S. Aircraft that are going to be arriving at an area of responsibility, and open source intelligence trackers were able to determine that these airplanes had indeed landed in the Muwaffaq Air Base in Jordan. And of course, the Jordanian army came out with a statement following a lot of these reports, including ours, and they denied that Jordan was being used as grounds for the U.S. to transfer supplies and ammunition for Israel to use in its bombing on Gaza, which is not something we have lent any credibility to. I don't think it makes any logistic sense whatsoever. That's not really what we wrote about, and it's actually what the Jordanian army does not deny. That's very interesting. They pointedly do not deny the reported arrival of those U.S. warplanes in Jordan. So generally, it just seems that Amman really cannot take more than cosmetic action against Israel without irking the United States, its main patron. Jordan's actions generally cannot be sufficient to satisfy parliamentary opposition to normalization between the two countries. Doing so would really require substantial measures, which includes this cancellation of the energy for water deal, but also Jordan needs to go a step further and cancel the Israel-Jordan gas deal. It needs to go a step further and cancel the Wadi Araba agreement. But ultimately, Jordan really remains an integral component of U.S. hegemony in the region. It shares Israel's longest border. It's one of the 2 only countries for many decades, including Egypt, to have had formal diplomatic relations with Israel before the series of signings through the Abraham Accords in 2020. Yes.
No, I think that's, do we lose time? Oh, we have you there. I think it's, critically important context in many different things. And I think it's notable sort of what people are saying versus what they're doing is always important. And, I would assume wanting to have a little difference between what you're saying and what you're doing is, you're worried about your own population and how they would react to, some level of or greater levels of complicity with the Israeli actions. So I guess, maybe for the layperson, perhaps you would look on a map and you see that Jordan and Palestine are close to each other. But I mean, I really feel that so much of what we've seen from the protests there, some of them have been just so massive. It's like something I've never seen before in many different places. Are there particularistic elements that are lending itself to this intense climate of solidarity with Palestine there in Jordan?
I mean, the vast majority of Jordan's population are descendants of Palestinian refugees, even if they're not officially recognized as refugees by UNRWA, the UN Agency for Refugees. The vast majority of Jordan's population are Palestinians, and this solidarity is natural. I mean, it's not we. Jordan is so close. When you're in Jordan, you feel just so close to this happening, just right there, and feeling completely incapable, completely helpless in trying to pressure the government to do something substantial other than pushing for humanitarian aid. I mean, the calls for the ceasefire are very welcome and very important, but there is just so much more to be done, and there is just this feeling of helplessness, as you know, given that Jordan remains a client state of the United States. To do something substantial to help end this Israeli genocide in Gaza. So it's really it's second nature. It's the Palestinian question is a regional question. It's a regional cause. It's a struggle against not just liberation from Israeli settler colonialism, but from this U.S. hegemony that keeps Jordan within the fold of the United States and Israel to be used in that way.
That stands out as well is there was an attempt. I mean, this is more speaking of Iraq as well, but there was this attempt of like Iraqis trying to go to the Jordanian border, and I'm just curious, as far as like the feelings go, you're talking about this feeling of, obviously much of the Jordanian population is of Palestinian descent, so it's like very close to many people's hearts and minds, but at the same time it does seem like there's a reorientation across the region that at least I've noticed. I'm speaking to you from Lebanon. Like, there was a period of time before October 7th where people were kind of like, oh yeah, Palestine's kind of a thing of the past. I mean, I don't think Iraqis were thinking about it too much. I'm not sure if Jordanians were thinking about it all the time, but it does seem like the region, at least on the ground in the streets, seems to be united in the fact that actually, no, this is the central issue of this region for A, B, and C reasons. And so I'm just curious if that feeling is there in Jordan, of not just of how we feel as Jordanians, but like as Arabs.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think there was ever a question that the Palestinian struggle was the central cause in the region. But I think what was proven on October 7th is just how, I mean, the sheer strategic and military failure that Israel underwent in those on that day was just showed Jordan Palestinians and everyone in the region that this monster that we thought was the most vaunted our region was rooted in a matter of hours, and I think this gave people hope that actually we are not condemned to live within in the shadow of our enemies. We're not condemned to live in the shadow of being client states. That freedom is actually very close. It's very capable. The armed resistance has developed. There is something to be said about that. I think I don't think there was ever any doubt that Palestine was the cause, but there was always this feeling of helplessness. You talk to people and they say, oh, it might never come back, and we might never return. But I think October 7th really showed people that Israel is not the vaunted army that we once thought it was.
Well, Tamara Nassar, Associate Editor of the Electronic Intifada, really appreciate you helping us sort through all of this and giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you guys.
Rania?